Hi, this is Scott. I really appreciate our sponsors because they make the show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Telerik. Create compelling app experiences across any screen with the Telerik platform. Telerik's end-to-end platform uniquely combines industry-leading UI tools with cloud services to simplify the entire app development cycle. Telerik offers everything .NET developers need to build quality apps faster. Try it free at telerik.com/platform. That's telerik.com/platform.
From HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 427. In this episode, Scott talks with Jonathan Barronville about what it really means to be a junior developer.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and I'm talking to Jonathan Barronville. He did a great blog post on Medium. I don't know if it's a blog post. Do you call that a medium, or what do you call that? A piece? An article?
Yeah, blog post, article. It doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah. It really took off, though, and the title is What It Really Means to Be a Junior Developer. This thing went all over the internet for a while there. I was really impressed with it, and it caused me to want to reach out to you. What made you write that? No one ever talks about the junior developer. Everyone's always talking about how they can become a senior developer, but no one ever comes and kind of keeps it real and says, okay, I'm a junior dev and this is why.
I wrote that because, at the time I was working for this company called AI Squared, and I was over there, I didn't have a title as a junior developer, but, to my coworkers and I guess everyone else in the industry, it was clear that I was the junior guy, right? And I think the main problem that I found was in the beginning, I kind of hated that as well. In fact, I had guys on my team who would sometimes refer to me as the junior guy. And at first, that gave me, the whole stigma around that word. I had those same feelings as well. And I always wondered, why am I being called the junior guy? But when I actually started thinking about it, I realized it was actually more of a benefit than anything. And I think what sparked me to write this article was I had a friend of mine who actually sent me an email, and he was pretty pissed about how the team he was on and how he liked working on the product, but he didn't like the fact that he was a junior developer and so on. And so instead of responding to his email, I just wrote the article and sent him a link. And so that was pretty much all my thoughts on that is pretty much, being a junior developer, I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's a great thing because, you get to actually be able to learn, get paid for it, and and it's okay for you to make mistakes. Whereas the senior guys, while they're the senior guys and they have that awesome title, if they mess up, it's harder for them to just say, hey, I'm able to mess up. You're expected as the senior guy or the architect to know certain things and not to make certain mistakes. As a junior guy, you're expected to make mistakes. So I think making mistakes is a good thing. So yeah, that's the gist of that.
Do you think that the term junior referred to age, or was it a bunch of old people telling the young guy, or was it pretty clear that it was experience in the industry, or was it experience at the company?
I think it was pretty much experience in the industry. That's how I saw it, and that's how I still see it. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts around what experience really means, and I don't really agree with how we do it now, but that's not even that's out of the scope of this.
No, I don't think it is out of the scope. I think that's excellent. That's right in the scope. What do you think about that?
So I guess my thoughts on that is that the way that we do experience just based on years of experience, I just don't think it's the right way. Where someone can say okay, you're officially a senior developer if you've been doing this for 10 years. I think it should be more along the lines of what you've learned and how, and I guess a lot of experience can you get that experience over a period of time. That's certainly true, but there's also how you learn things, and I think as you learn more and more things, and as you become experts in them. And remember, I made a different I talked about this in my article about true experts versus experts, where you learn JavaScript and you know it really well, but you still have not hit certain roadblocks, and until you hit those roadblocks, you will not know that you don't know certain things, right? And so those are things that you gain by using that tool or like language or framework, whatever, over a period of time. But I guess long story short is that I feel like we should rethink. I couldn't say I have a solution to it, but I just think that we should rethink the way that we even talk about experience in general. It's like, this guy must be senior because he's been doing this for 10 years. And this guy must be, junior because he's been doing this for 3 years, right? So that's just, I guess, my thoughts on that, really.
I've said before on this show that I've met people with 20 years experience, but it's the same year 20 times.
Yeah.
And it's like, like, I don't want to like insult people. So like respect to people who are listening if you might think that you're this person. But let's say that you work for, I'm just going to pick a company, Coca-Cola, and you went to work for them right out of college and you've been there for 20 years and you know everything there is to know about Coca-Cola and how they run their software systems by like the back of your hand. But you're still writing in the exact same language and the exact same way, using the exact same development model and the exact same project management style as 20 years ago. That is literally the same exact year 20 times. That's very different from someone who maybe had 4 different jobs, 5 years each, in a diverse group of technologies with a diverse group of people doing solving and presumably failing in a diverse amount of ways. I think I would have more respect for the person who's done that than the one that's just been doing one thing for their whole life.
Yeah, that's literally exactly what I mean. It's like those 20 years, like they don't, at that point, they don't really mean much. It's what you've done over those 20 years and like how much you've learned. And you see what I'm saying? Like, so like the example you took of like, 5 years each of like learning different tools and becoming experts in those things, over that period of time. Like, yeah, you are a senior like guy after those 20 years. You see what I'm saying? But like that other guy, I mean, I guess it's at the end of the day, it all depends on like how much meaning you give the word itself. And like, I don't know.
How much of it do you think is years versus mindset? Because I'm sure that there's someone who's listening who is seeing themselves in that statement and they've been at company X 20 years and like, wait a second, why are you picking on me, Scott? It may be mindset. Could you be somewhere 20 years? But in your mind, you're making each year fresh and you're bringing in new ideas and trying to cause innovation, even though you're at the same company for your entire career.
Oh yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with the company. I think it's more along the lines of like I guess it all has to do with learning, right? That's my main thing about it, is that like it's right now it's based off of years. I think it should be based off of like what you've learned and like and how you've been able to like, solve some problems, some interesting problems or things like that. Not like I feel like if you've worked 5 years at one company and you never really managed to like solve some really like, I guess you can't come up with like a critical problem that you had to solve that you learned something from. And then somebody else who worked at, a similar company, they're able to, tell you like 5 different things they were able to, like figure out how to solve and things like that. I think that person, I feel, is more experienced to me because like that person actually had certain problems they had to solve and they came up with a solution, and whether it worked or not, they can tell you what happened. But, it was that, I think that's what experience means to me, actually.
I think that the most interesting part of what you just said was the whether it worked or not. I think that's significant because I don't think that we value failure enough as an industry. I wrote a blog post a while back about certifications and how you'll have someone who's like a PhD who spends like, 7-8 years in college so they can go comma PhD at the end of their name. Yeah. But then you have another person who goes and gets like a Cisco certification and some Microsoft certifications, and suddenly it's like Jonathan Barronville, comma MCP, MCSD, comma Cisco A+. Yeah. And like, really, man, this dude went to like evil doctor school for like 8 years so he could say PhD. You took a test at Horizon Learning Center for 40 minutes and you get to put stuff at the comma. Why not say Scott Hanselman, comma, 4 successful projects, comma, 3 failed startups, like tell me what you learned. So you keep bringing up this idea of it should be measured on what you learned. How do we keep that from becoming a list of bullet points of languages I know? Even with languages, like, I don't think it's the languages that matter. It's like, for example, when you get into languages, the whole like fight about like, whether you should use Ruby or Python or Node.js. I always have arguments with developers about this because like, I feel like you should just learn, like take as much time as you can. I mean, like
people don't have infinite amount of time, but like if you like any free time you have, learn new things. And just because I find that like even with languages, for example, or frameworks or whatever, every time I learn a new one, just like learning how to use it, I'm not any expert in it or anything like that, but just learning how to use it, I learned something new, right? Like just a quick small example, and this is not like a humble brag, but like a language that I got into that totally bended my mind was Haskell. Like I just got into it and like started playing around with it, and I thought like even though I don't use Haskell for I like use a Haskell for literally nothing. Like it's just more theoretical for me and stuff like that. But the fact that I started learning this stuff, it really taught me about type systems, and you see what I'm saying. So like I feel like you should not be focusing on, like getting a bunch of, tools to, should tell people like, hey, I know Haskell, I know Erlang, I know all this stuff. It should be more on like just learning things so you could become, I guess, more experienced. Like, so you can like, understand new problems. And like, if I approach a certain problem, I can think of set of different tools that can be used to solve that, and maybe try to figure out the best one. And if I don't know that, like if I don't already know, if I'm no expert in that tool yet, then I can become an expert in that tool in order to solve that problem. But if you don't even know that tool exists, or if you don't even know it's there, or you see what I'm saying? Like that's sort of where I stand with that. It shouldn't be just a set of bullet points. And this is all opinion, by the way. I'm not.
Hey, this whole podcast is opinion. That's what it is.
Okay. Yeah. So like I just don't think it should be like, hey, I'm jotting down a bunch of like skills. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it shouldn't be that. I think it should be more people should be more focused on learning. That's
your whole story right there.
That's the whole story. Like you should be more focused on learning, not a degree, or not getting a bunch of certifications. That it should be more on the learning. What am I learning, and what experience am I gaining from it? What problems can I solve with this thing I just learned? Should I be learning it more and stuff like that?
One of the things that I want to kind of pull out of what you said was the idea of, but I know that this thing exists. Like you said, Erlang. I know Erlang exists. I've read all about it. I've never personally programmed in Erlang. Mm-hmm. But I do think that I have a sense, this is just me speaking about myself, I have a sense of how the computer science landscape works, and I have a sense of how architectural systems work, that if I saw a problem that screamed use Erlang, that I would recognize that problem. I like to think this about myself. And I would recognize that problem, and I would bring that to management and say, this really feels like an Erlang problem. I think that C# is not the language for that, or, whatever. And I think that knowledge of this thing exists. Sometimes I'll talk to people and I'll say, well, gosh, this really feels like the way that Node does things. Like, I don't really know anything about Node. Well, you don't really need to know it and be an expert at it. You don't have to be proficient in it to know that it solves a class of problems. And then the simple awareness that it exists then lets you know when it's time to go and learn a particular problem.
Yep, exactly. Let me put it this way. Like, and again, this is not a humble brag, but I've played with over like 15, 20 languages, and I can only call myself an expert in like maybe PHP. Like, I can really only call myself, like, I know all the corners of PHP just because that's what I use the longest.
See, now this call is over. I'll just hang up on you now because you love PHP.
But no, like, I'm just like, I'm just trying to make
that's your language. That's the language that you know. I know C#. Like, that's the one language that, don't mess with me, I know C#. That's exactly. PHP, that's your language. Totally got that.
Yeah, like if somebody were to tell me this is not how this works in PHP, I could have a debate with them. If somebody tells me this is not how this works in Erlang, I'll sit down and just listen because, like, you see what I'm saying? So, like, that's, but yeah, I know, like, if there's a problem that should be solved with Node.js, like you just said, I can tell, okay, maybe we should use Node.js for this. And then I can, whatever I don't know about Node.js, then spend my time learning it. And I honestly, in my opinion, I think that's like that's how I feel like people should be gaining experience, not, saying, hey, I know Angular, I know Ember, I know Backbone, I know Erlang, I know Haskell. Great, all these tools, but like, how's that helping your learning? So
right, exactly. Like, I think about it in the context of being a carpenter. Like, carpenters don't typically focus on their tool belt. They don't like, I'm a carpenter, and then on their resume it's like, things that I know: screwdriver, hammer. Right? They know about how, how wood works and behaves, and how houses work and behave under pressure, and how to cut something is different from the saw that I use to cut it. There's like 1,000 ways to cut a piece of wood just right. Mm-hmm. Knowing which tool is much more important than saying, well, I know how to use a saw. That's the only thing, what's the thing that they say that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a
everything,
nail.
Yep, everything looks like a nail. Yeah.
So do you think the difference between a junior engineer and a senior engineer is the kind of the beginnings of those realizations about knowing what you don't know, knowing what's available in the landscape, and when it's time to bring in another tool or bring in a bit of learning?
Sort of, kind of. I mean, I still find a lot of like developers that I would classify, and I don't walk up to them and tell them that, but I would classify them as junior developers, and they don't really see that. I mean, I think like a lot of junior, like a lot of junior developers, it's hard for them to even realize that. That's what I think is
that they're junior.
Yeah, like that. Not that they're junior, but that there's a lot of stuff that. Well, I guess that they're junior, because like there's a lot of stuff that they don't know yet or things like that, and yeah, it's an interesting like I guess it's an interesting situation to be in, because like I mean I still consider myself a junior developer, and I don't think I'm gonna be.
How long have you been developing?
I guess since I was 12, 13, but I wouldn't really call that development.
See,
right?
It's funny that you say that. So bringing in ageism a little bit. I don't know how old you are, but I'm
19.
You're 19. Oh,
yeah,
Lord. So I'm 40. Okay. So there's two things here. There's the number of years we've been in the industry. Mm-hmm. That's one level of experience. And then there's age. Mm-hmm. Like if I were 40 with 2 years experience, then I'm going to defer to you because maybe you've got 2 years experience too. But I'm 40. I've been in the industry for 20, 25 years, but I don't know anything about PHP. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I'm going to defer to you. So I feel like there's all this kind of axes, years experience in the industry, years experience in a language. And then there's always this implied kind of ageism aspect. But I would hope that I would have the maturity as someone who is older than you, but doesn't know what you know about PHP, to recognize that and like be deferential and say, okay, well, Jonathan's clearly the expert. So why would I come up against you on a PHP related question?
See, that's like one of the, like that's a problem that I find actually across all developers. Like one of the things I find developers are so, I guess, stubborn about is actually asking questions. Like I feel like developers have this stigma where they feel like they should know everything. So like, if they're in like at a conference or at a meetup, like even like sometimes I'm giving a talk and you could tell that this guy doesn't really get this thing, but he will never ask the question, right? And like, and then you have a conversation with that same guy after the talk and you realize like the first pretty much 15 minutes of everything you said made absolutely no sense to him, right? But like you could have asked that. I mean, I think it's a big problem that like we've made ourselves think that we should be able to do everything and we shouldn't be able to I feel it's bad because it's bad for learning, right? Because if you're not okay with asking a question, right? Like saying, hey, I do not know what dependency injection is. Can you explain that to me? Mm-hmm. If you feel like I must know what dependency injection is, so if I don't know it, I'm stupid and developers are going to think I'm stupid and no one will hire me, then you're not ever going to learn what dependency injection is. You're just going to keep having that thought and you're never going to ask anyone and you're going to try to read as much you can on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia will bring you down a rabbit hole. And so yeah, like I think it's a big problem across developers in general. Like I see it like literally every day, like where some developer, you could tell they don't understand something, but they don't want to ask it, right? They just feel like.
What are we doing as a culture that causes that? Like I know there's been lots of discussion about like nerd culture and everything we talk about is a generalization, but what is it about programmers where there's this sense of posturing? Like there's such power in saying, I don't know. Like it took me 10 years of my career before I realized that it's okay to be in a meeting with a bunch of important people and say, I'm sorry, what does that acronym mean? You know what I mean? Like yeah. That's, I'm like raising my hands and I'm gesturing because I feel so excited about this and strongly about this. Like if there's one thing I can tell you, my 19-year-old self, is that you might be in a meeting with a bunch of VPs or something, and then there's going to be an acronym that's going to come out or a word, or this even happened to me, even an English word. Mm-hmm. That I'm not 100% familiar with. Like I'm reading your article here and I saw, you use the word déjà vu. I know what that means. And then you have another word that's French. Jamais vu. What does that mean?
Jamais vu. Never seen.
Okay. So yeah. I don't know that, right? I know I could Google it, but I'm going to ask you, but there's power in that. I truly don't know what that means. And there's nothing, it doesn't lessen me to simply ask.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And when I finally decided I call it leaning in. Like, it's one thing to go and say, what does that mean exactly? as opposed to, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Which acronym is NSA? Oh, National Security Agency. Sorry. Thank you. Moving right along. Like, lean into it. Like, really don't know. You know what I mean? Don't, like, not know a little bit. Like, I have no idea what Bitcoin is. So please get me up to speed. And no one's going to be like, he's a senior engineer. Why did he not?
Well, see, what I find actually funny about this is that I have not met one developer that knows everything. Like, that's what
you never will. You never will.
That's what I find funny about this. I mean, even like, for example, like, I guess in our community, for example, we'll look at people who write, let's just say, Haskell or C code as, like, those are the top developers, right? And so, like, I have a friend of mine who actually does embedded C programming. And right now, he's learning how to do web development. And it's like, he will send me an email, like, literally, like, every day. Dude, what is JSON-P? Like, even reading on Wikipedia what JSON-P is, he has no idea. He still doesn't understand it, right?
Yeah.
But yet, if you gave him, you know, like a PCB and like and a compiler and told, you see what I'm saying? Like, this guy can actually, you know, like, build the computer that's running this
He's
website.
Brilliant. He's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally get you. I met this guy at Intel. He's like, 75-year-old guy. This is like a technical fellow. This is someone who's been at Intel 20, 25 years, working on low-level microcode in the processor itself. Came to me after a talk and wanted to learn web development. It like took me a second. Like, here's someone with 40 years experience in the industry, literally building the planet of silicon that we sit on top of. And he wants to know how to say hello world on a web page.
Yep.
But he was not in any way upset about that.
Exactly.
It was not unapologetic, I think would be the way to phrase it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just, I feel like all the stigma should just go away. And it's easier said than done, but it's like, you shouldn't feel like you need to know everything. Like, and to be fair, like, I found myself in that situation. I guess how I started changing that about myself is so for example, I'll like go give a talk at a meetup, and then I would then, after the meetup, during chats with other people, like with the attendees, I'd realize they didn't understand it. And it would piss me off. Like, I wouldn't show them that I'm pissed off, but it would piss me off that they didn't feel okay to actually ask that. And so over time, I started actually looking at myself, like, am I like that? Like, when I go to a talk, am I like that? Do I feel like I should know everything and things like that? And so I guess now at least I try. Like, if I don't understand something, I don't care if I'm in an audience of 500 people. There's nothing that says I should know it. Like, there's no book out there that says, if a developer does not know dependency injection, you're not a developer, right? So, like, I feel like we should just get away with, like, understand that, and like, that will really make learning a whole different experience, right? Because, yeah, and it's I think it all comes back to developers thinking that they should be able to do everything, and not like and not agreeing that, hey, I don't know this, let me ask this other developer, or even let me hire somebody else to do this to solve this problem, right? Like, that's not my type of problem. Things like that. So,
yeah, I think that we as a culture need to embrace not knowing and embrace new people coming in. Like, there was this old Saturday Night Live thing back when Jimmy Fallon, about 19 years ago, when Jimmy Fallon was on Saturday Night Live, he had a thing called Nick Burns, your company's computer guy. You got to go and Google this for me. Nick Burns, your company's computer guy. And basically, people would have a problem, and he'd be like, I'm trying to set up the printer. And then Nick, the company's, he was like a stereotypical company's computer guy. And he'd come over and he'd go, move. And then he'd shove them away, and he'd go, he'd tappity on the keyboard, and he'd go, was that so hard? And it's like, we've met that person. Like, we know that person, that individual who makes you feel like so dumb. And the entire thing was Jimmy Fallon as your company's computer guy, making you feel like the worst, tiniest person because you didn't know how to copy a file from here to there. Like, we need to make that stop as an industry.
Yes,
it's
actually,
not okay to make people feel like that.
Actually, I think that's part of the big problem that causes that bigger problem, right? It's like, it's people that make the other people that don't know some things, like, think that they should know it, right? Because the way, like, even the way you respond to a question, right? Like, if you're giving a talk and somebody asks you a question, the way you respond to it might make that person never want to ask a question ever again, right? So, like, I think that's the same way that, you know, we're having all these other problems in tech where, like, with, you know, women in tech and just diversity in general. I think we should also be calling out people who do stuff like that. Like, if somebody asks something And like, if I'm at a talk and somebody asks a question and like the speaker responds in a certain way that's very condescending, like, I feel like people should say, hey, like, it's okay if he doesn't know this. Like, why did you have to answer like that? Can, just answer the question, at some point. And it turns out that even that speaker, I'm pretty sure at some point they didn't know what that was as well. So like, yeah, it's something that I feel like, yeah, as a community, we can definitely improve. It just would take like everyone's help, but no one will be able to. I think that's just that's like, if I were to actually sit down and try to put a mathematical equation behind that, like, you cannot learn if you do not know that, if you cannot be okay with actually asking someone, right? Like, if you're not okay with like saying, hey, I don't know this, can you explain to me what you meant by that? Then you'll keep thinking that you should know it, right? And because you'll keep thinking that, you'll never actually learn it, right? And so that's a problem.
I really like saying and reminding to people, even ones who've been in the industry for 20 years plus, is that we're all amateurs. Like, we're all learning. You got to keep that passion. You linked to Peter Norvig's article, Teach Yourself Programming in Just 10 Short Years.
Yes.
And I think the thing that you said was great is like, why is everyone in such a rush? Like, you're 19. I don't know when you expect to be a senior engineer. Pretty sure it's not going to be when you're 21.
In fact, I don't even care about that.
In fact, I smile because that's the answer that you should have given, is that, yeah, I mean, it'll happen when I feel comfortable, but then maybe you'll switch languages. Like, if I switched over and became a full-time Ruby programmer, I would be a junior programmer, and that would be totally fine. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
Why do you think that people in their early 20s or mid 20s, or people who just have 4 or 5 years experience, want to be senior right away? Like, why does that name mean so much? Because I know carpenters and plumbers and electricians that work for years and years and years just to be journeymen and move their way up to being a master carpenter or a master electrician.
Well, I mean, if we had to look at everything, like, from what I can see, I think part of it has to do with the fact that, like, I guess, I mean, to me, that doesn't matter, but of course that matters to a lot of people, which is the fact that, like, senior guys get paid more, for example, right? Like, they get paid more. So, to somebody who's a junior guy, they might be like, well,
really?
Does that mean
it just comes down to pay?
No, I'm not saying it's just pay, but that's just one example of something, right? It's like seeing that person saying, oh, like, this guy, I know much more than him, but he's getting, like, paid $25K more than me. You know what I'm saying? And like, at that point, you start feeling like, why am I not getting paid that? I actually talked about that in the article. It's like, when you feel like, I know all of this, right? And that's typical with junior developers, is that, like, I know all of this, and then you look at, your coworker who's the senior guy, and he's like, he just knows Java, and that's it. But he could tell you everything about Java, right? And I know all of this that could provide much more value for the company, but this guy's getting paid $25K more than me, right? So that's just one example. I mean, it's not all about money. Like, for me, I don't really care about that. Like, but that's one example of things. And the other thing is just like having that title, right? Senior versus junior. I guess that in general must mean something. And that's the whole point of my article, was saying, like, ignore the title. Don't even care about it. Like, and even like with like, right now what I do full time is I'm working on my own company, right? And like, even if I could have filed for my company without actually giving myself a title, I would have been so happy. I had to give myself a title, so I have a title. But I think titles are also part of the problem. It's like, don't care about your title, just care about your role and how you're learning in your role, and how you're, like, that's all that stuff has some part in it. I feel so. Right.
That's almost like that's kind of a we call this the Star Trek Next Generation way of thinking, where, there was this really great episode of Star Trek, I think it was a movie actually, in Star Trek Generations, when someone from the past comes forward and they're talking to, I think it was Alfre Woodard. She's talking to Jean-Luc Picard, and he's like, oh, we have no money here. We've elevated to a higher level of understanding, and we work as a culture towards knowledge. And, it's silly to make a Star Trek reference, but that is kind of the goal. Like, what you're saying is, forget the title for a second. Yeah, money's important, but let's put that aside. Is this job, is my attitude, are my coworkers helping me learn more, better myself, and be the kind of developer, and hence the kind of person that I want to be?
Exactly. Like, and I feel like once you start, and a lot of this is also easier said than done, but I feel like once you understand that, like for me, until I understood that, I had those same thoughts. I can't lie. I had those same thoughts. Like, I would look at my coworker and I'm like, why is this guy getting paid more than me? Right. But like, once I understood that, I actually took advantage of it. And like, an example is at AI Squared, the software architect. Our software architect was Brian. His name was Brian, and like a lot that I know about software development in general, I can credit to Brian. Like he even like scalability. I knew what the word meant, but like I had never like had to deal with that, right? But he, just by him explaining a story of him working at Akamai and explaining how something went, and how they managed to solve a specific problem, I now had an idea of how to solve that problem myself, right? And like, if I wasn't open to actually saying, hey, I don't know this, even to myself and being able to say, okay, let me just sit down and listen to what Brian has to say with his, 10 years of experience and stuff like that. Like, if I didn't actually sit down to like, if I wasn't okay with that, then even if I was sitting there looking at him, I probably would have not been paying attention to him, right? Or whatnot. So I feel like it's easier said than done, but once you realize that it's actually more of like, I feel like you should just take it as a learning experience. If you're considered a junior developer, and I think I'm going to be a junior developer for probably the next 10 years, 20 years, I don't really care. But like, just take it as a learning experience. And if you see it that way, I feel like it's going to have a better effect on you than anything, right?
Yeah, I definitely think you've got the right attitude. And I think that you've realized already that the most important part of asking questions is the listening afterwards.
Yes.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Jonathan Barronville. We'll make sure to put a link to Jonathan's article up on the show notes. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.